What's going on, Babylonians? It's me, Songs of Rage, and I'm back with some more Miasma Chronicles, guys, to be able to bring to the channel. Now, today we're going to be discussing the very last fight that's going to be in this game. This is going to be the Quendyl boss fight, and it's overall a ridiculously challenging boss fight to be able to actually go into, because it summons so many collectors, and as we know when we played through most of this game, is that the collectors, with the sheer amount of HP, the sheer amount of armor that they have to boot, and on top of that, the amount of damage that they're able to output is just insane. It's a very nasty combination, and we're going to be fighting a bunch of them when it comes to this, and there's not too much cover. We're going to be flanked pretty much left, right and centre when it comes to this, and on top of that, spoiler alert, we will also be fighting Elvis as well when it comes to this. Now, just a heads up, there will be a couple of spoilers when it comes to this, so if you are looking to be able to just complete the rest of the game, if you're not looking to be able to have any spoilers, this is your warning right now that maybe just actually play the game. If you have a bit of difficulty with the fight, then come back and watch this video, because I do have some tips, I do have some tricks to be able to help you out, and stuff that I've managed to pick up when I went into this firefight and was a little bit blind when it came to it. Overall, this is another one of those where it's intensely challenging, but it is incredibly satisfying once you do actually complete it. So let's have a look into it. Let's start getting into the tips. But if you do enjoy this video, if you learn something useful with ourselves, make sure to drop a like and subscribe. Find your way back to the channel for more Miasma Chronicles guides in the future. But with all that said and done, let's get right into it. Okay, so these tips are in no particular order. I'm going to actually put the gameplay in the background, and then we'll discuss everything that's pretty much going on when it comes to the firefight afterwards, but the tips are the most important things, I feel, because when it comes to like combat, it can actually vary depending on where you position your characters, what kind of abilities they plan to use, and how you've currently got your characters geared up, what part are you taking, etc, etc. So there's quite a few variables, so I'm not going to go too much into the actual fight, what actually worked for myself, but I will actually discuss some tips to be able to help you out in that kind of aspect. Now, my first tip, and one that's really important when it comes to this, and it literally cannot be stated enough, is that acid and armor breaker skills are being off cooldown or being used in this fight in general are going to be absolutely key. Because the amount of armor that every single one of the collectors, whether that be the wardens, whether that be the troopers, or whether that be the speakers, etc, etc, every single unit that comes into here is going to have a massive amount of armor, and if you haven't managed to upgrade your arsenal far enough to be able to actually adapt for that and still do a decent amount of chunk of damage through all of that, you're going to need to rely on being able to break all of that armor to be able to then start doing some reliable DPS. Now, it is very important to be able to do that because we are going to be fighting up to 10 enemies when it comes to this as well, meaning that we kind of need to be able to balance our cooldowns as well to be efficient, and that also means that shotguns are going to be amazing when it comes to this as well, meaning that we want to be able to apply this status as much as possible to be able to break armor on as many targets as possible on every single one of our cooldowns. So make sure you have a shotgun. I highly recommend being able to grab the wide boy. If you haven't already got the wide boy before this fight, you definitely want to have checked out the previous guide that we've done that, discussing everything that's crucial about the wide boy and why it's one of the best shotguns in the whole game. Now, my second tip for this is going to be a miasma power, and this is going to be about Mindworm. Now, Mindworm is probably one of the best skills to actually use in this fight, because what it allows you to be able to do is take over control of one of the collectors. So most importantly, I always go for one of the wardens. That's because they have quite a bit of health that we want to be able to chunk through. They have a bit of armor, and some of the enemies that we will be going up against have ways to be able to remove armor as well. So not only is it great as doubling down as a way to be able to take an enemy away so that's not going to be shooting you, it's also going to be a great way for the enemies to start shooting them to be able to start stripping off their armor, so that when you then lose control of that unit, you then already have a way to be able to deal some more damage through that armor and be able to punch through to that health bar. Now, Mindworm is especially effective on being able to take hold of a warden, because the wardens have access to armor breakers in of themselves, and they also have a shotgun type weapon as well, meaning that you can use this to be able to apply armor breaker onto a bunch of enemies right in front of you, so it's almost an ideal target to be able to take. Also, wardens are absolutely nasty when it comes to this game, because they have ways to be able to knock you down, stunning you, and they also have ways to be able to strip off your own armor, so it is almost vital that you need to be able to take control of one of those wardens straight away to be able to have a chance of being able to survive this. Now, my third, fourth, and fifth pick, or my tips when it comes to this, is actually going to be talking about team composition. Now, while we already have had a couple of moments or a couple of fights where we don't have Elvis around and we have to be able to work our way around who we want to be able to take in, I do recommend that you do take in Barmadi for this one, because it's almost an instant lock for this fight, having access to EMP shots to be able to stun enemies, because every single one of these apart from one is going to be electrical, and it's almost going to be susceptible to this. So it's almost being able to, when you pair this with a shotgun, it is a great way to be able to widespread apply stun, and it just allows you to be able to have that really nice damage output. She also has access to multiple uses of a Miasma power, and she also has a way to be able to recharge another teammate, which we'll discuss a little bit later on as to which one to be able to take in, but she has a way to be able to supply some extra energy rather than having to use like a power core to be able to then get access to those more Miasma abilities. I do feel like Diggs' mobility and knockdown skills are also crucial when it comes to this, allowing you to be able to maintain the battlefield at all times. Having access to tackle is a great way to be able to deal with all those lesser troops, like for example the troopers, or when it comes to speakers or anything. The only thing it won't help you out with is going to be wardens, because they're immune to knockback. That means that they're actually immune to tackle, and the same can be said for leap. Leap is an amazing ability when it comes to this, because it allows you to be able to have that high count of mobility, but also is a great way to be able to knock down an enemy and be able to do some stun. Personally, I did enjoy using Diggs for this fight, and I think he's a great way to be able to start controlling the battlefield, because he has relatively short cooldowns, allowing you to be able to keep enemies under stun and to be able to then start adjusting the battlefield to your liking. As for the fifth tip, I will actually personally prefer Jade over Mason for the third pick, because having access to a rage increase ability, to be able to have access to acid shot, a miasma power, and also a turret for AoE DPS is just insane. Now, don't get me wrong, Mason is brilliant to be able to bring for pure DPS. If you were looking for a fight to be able to like consistently fire off those warheads, the ones that do some massive AoE damage, and they do a really consistent amount of damage in of themselves, absolutely perfect. He's also got an auto revive ability, so you don't have to worry too much when it comes to being able to like look after him in of himself, so you don't have to use med pods. He's got ways to be able to increase the amount of distance that you can throw grenades. I think he's got some nice utility, but I do feel like Jade is the perfect choice for this, and also complements perfectly when it comes to Barmadi, because she has an ability to be able to increase the energy of another teammate on the field, and that means that we can use Jade for a miasma power, allowing us to be able to bring in 3 powers, and also then we can get a recharge from Barmadi just for free, just that 60 energy, which is a great way to be able to start using more mobility or more utility when it comes to our powers, to be able to start throwing enemies around the battlefield and everything like that. So I think the synergy is better to have Barmadi, Diggs and Jade, but you definitely can get some work done with Mason, so don't feel like it has to be that composition. Feel free to be able to mess about with what you prefer. Our 6th tip will actually talk about the inventory, and it's really important, as it has been through most of the endgame when it comes to this, to be able to have things like acid grenades. Acid grenades do a sheer amount of like utility when it comes to this. They're a great way to be able to start stripping off armor. They're a great way to be able to apply some damage over time, because none of the collectors are immune to it. You also, taking off armor is insane, and because it is an AoE splash thing, that means that you can shape the battlefield to be able to apply it to more than one enemy at a time. So having multiple uses of an acid grenade is a great way to be able to start most of these fights. Speaking of acid though, the 7th tip is actually just to be able to pay attention to your surroundings. Now in this we do have barrels that do exist around, and we have upgraded versions of barrels, because in this case instead of doing fire damage they will actually do acid, and then they will leave a portion of the floor dripping with acid for any enemies to be able to walk into. Now these barrels are brilliant to be able to start using. You need to be able to pay attention as to when some enemies get within kind of distance of these, because they do a massive amount of damage, and on top of that they then apply acid to that enemy, meaning that they're going to start stripping away that armor, which is an absolute godsend if you're finding that most of your abilities that are able to strip away armor when you need them are still on cooldown, and you need a way to be able to start applying that damage over time. So make sure to be able to use things like Miasma Storm to be able to throw enemies into acid barrels. Feel free to be able to use Diggs to be able to do knockback into those kind of barrels or that kind of area, and then if you notice that there's some enemies that already are close enough, feel free to shoot the barrels to be able to apply that acid as well. My 8th tip when it comes to this is actually going to be talking more about the miasma powers, the ones that were instant locks for myself. In this case, I find that Mindworm and Call of the Grabber are purely have to be instant locks for this fight, because allowing you to be able to control an enemy, like we already have discussed, is absolutely perfect for being able to manage some of the battlefield, to be able to manage some of the damage that will be coming your way. But on top of that, Call of the Grabber is already an insane skill, and has been pretty much ever since we completed that first boss fight, all the way back when it came to Frogland. Having a frog companion that allows you to be able to walk around, to be able to absorb some of the direct, like the firefights that will be coming your way, but is also a great way to be able to start healing teammates all the way back up to full, giving you some really nice sustain in the fight, is absolutely perfect. And Call of the Grabber has to be the best skill in the whole game, but when combined with Mindworm as well, and it just makes this fight so much easier, so much more simpler. So if you are going to take any 2 skills in, Mindworm and Call of the Grabber have to be instant locks. So let's shift away and start talking about power cores. Now, in the majority of the game, when it came to power cores, it was always important to be able to start putting some armor pieces on, to be able to then start like mitigating some of the damage that will be coming your way. It just gives you some really nice survivability, it gives you nice some sustain in fights. But the downside to when it comes to this fight is because of the sheer amount of collectors that you will be going up against, they pretty much almost all of ways have an ability that's able to strip away that armor, meaning that once it's gone, that's it. Your power cores are doing nothing for you, and it makes more sense to be able to have something that gives you a little bit more utility rather than being able to have something that gives you armor. Now, in the gameplay in the background, I didn't do this, I didn't swap this out, but this is what I've learned from actually taking part in that fight, so feel free to be able to mix and match with a few different power cores in there, allowing something like an acid core as a way to be able to ignore critical hits, or even extra kilowatt capacity to be able to have that sustain in the fight. My penultimate tip will be that Elvis will become a massive nuisance when it comes to this fight if you do not deal with him early enough. You do not necessarily have to keep Elvis alive to be able to complete this mission. Technically, the only win condition for this fight is to defeat all of the collectors, and there are 10 of them that will eventually all spawn when it comes to this fight, so you don't necessarily have to deal with Elvis if you don't want to, but if you do deal with Elvis, then, you know, he's not gone altogether or anything like that, he's just purely injured / incapacitated, so therefore don't worry too much about putting him down. The best way to actually deal with Elvis, I've managed to find, is that Diggs is a perfect counter to him, and while Diggs can be EMP stunned by Elvis when it comes to his chain, Electro Chainer, Diggs has got two abilities that work absolutely perfectly with this. So he has Tackle, which Elvis can't deal anything about, and he also has Leap, which is another great way to be able to do a knockback, meaning that Elvis is out for 2 turns by using these two abilities. I would personally recommend that you use Diggs to be able to prioritize Elvis at the start, and then feel free to be able to use, for example, Jade and Barmadi to be able to start dealing with the other troopers that are pretty much around. And lastly, when it comes to this is just more of a hint that's to do with skill decks, so just remember that fire will be absolutely pointless in this fight, except if you do plan on using it on Elvis. The reason why I mention this is that because Jade, for example, has access to Plasma Shot, which is a skill that you're able to put a few points into to be able to deal some extra damage over time. And because all of the collectors are immune to fire damage, or just in general, that means they won't receive any extra damage on the initial shot, they won't receive any of the damage over time, so feel free to be able to take that ability away, and feel free to be able to move those points around. At this point of the game, you pretty much will be at level 25, which is max level, so feel free to be able to start adjusting that to be able to pick up maybe something else that will actually help you out in the fight. So there we go, that is a summary of the 11 tips that I've managed to pick up straight away from being able to take part in this fight, and that just leaves the general kind of like consensus when it comes to the fight as to how it all kind of plays out, how it all kind of works, and then the second phase of the fight to be able to discuss. So I'm going to leave the gameplay to be able to play in the background, but what I will do is discuss how it all works, and then what you should expect going forward, and then you can see my gameplay to be able to pick up a few things from there. So when it comes to the initial fight, you'll have to deal with Quendyl, and you'll also have to deal with 2 wardens that are pretty much either side of you. Now these 2 wardens are pretty nasty, and wardens have been nasty throughout most of the game, so you definitely need to be aware of these, and the best way to be able to deal with this is to be able to use Mind Worm to be able to take control of one of these. If you take that and then you use their armor piercing ability, you can strip off a couple of armor points straight away, and if you put them close enough to the other warden, that means the warden will then focus on them rather than your own teammates. That just means that you have to deal with Elvis, and that, like I said, Diggs is absolutely perfect in being able to do that, so make sure you knock Elvis down as soon as possible. After 2 turns of this fight, then Quendyl will summon 2 more enemies, which is going to be a trooper and a speaker. Now, you've face planted these plenty of times before, so just keep an eye on the speaker because this one has access to being able to pop shields on any of its teammates, and the trooper for its hard-hitting shots. Feel free to start moving your way around the battlefield, but I would recommend that you don't stick too close to the stairs because this is going to be important for the next phase. So you make sure to go either left or either right, but make sure to keep your team fairly close by so that if you do need it, like the worst does happen, and you need to be able to pop a medipod, then make sure they're within some kind of distance that they have access to be able to start popping one of those. 2 more turns in and you'll have another trooper and an elite trooper to deal with where the original wardens were, which is why it's important that you don't want to be stood around the stairs too much, meaning that you're now going to be flanked due to these alternating spawns, and you'll start seeing that this is going to be similar going forward. So the more spawns that actually do pop in, they'll start to alternate between closer to Quendyl or closer to where you initially spawned into the fight. The same basics apply here for armor removal, and make sure to be able to keep moving from cover to cover so that you're not cornered. After another couple of turns, and once again we do get another trooper and elite trooper spawn, and these time they're going to be near Quendyl, so make sure to keep on your toes and to keep whittling down those HP bars. And then lastly, the last two enemies that are going to be spawned in are going to be the hardest, because you've pretty much used most of your abilities at this point, and that is going to spawn in an elite warden and an elite trooper, and those are going to be back towards the stairs when you initially started. So these will be the final enemies to be able to finish off, so make sure you keep your wits about you, keep moving, and get ready to be able to break some more armor.
need to reload. Move for me, Miasma. Come on!
Once all the enemies have been mopped up though, you'll get a cutscene leading you into the next stage, gaining Elvis back to be able to carry on the fight against Quendyl. Now, due to Elvis's immense power level from becoming the Alpha Editor, this part is going to be an absolute breeze because he now sports a level 3 assault rifle at standard and 4 Alpha Miasma powers, which now need no kilowatts to be able to use. On top of that, the damage for these abilities have now been cranked up to 11, making mincemeat of every single target that's on the field. These powers are Alpha Electro Chainer, Alpha Miasma Blast, Alpha Miasma Storm, and Alpha Teleport. Now, while I haven't tested damage or health values on the harder difficulties just yet, on normal mode this section can be completed in as little as 3 turns, depending if you want to be able to have fun or not with the new power level that's been granted to you. Now, the fight starts with Quendyl summoning 4 elite troopers in the far right corner of the map, giving you ample time to be able to finish this off before they really get close enough to be able to engage. But using Elvis, you can use your Alpha Teleport to be able to bring Quendyl down to your level and right next to you, and then make sure you hit him with an Alpha Miasma Blast to be able to keep him in place, ready for that follow-up turn. Hitting Quendyl for a whopping 1k damage, and it chunks his shield down massively. For the rest of the fight though, feel free to be able to mess about with the rest of the abilities, but me personally, I just wanted to be able to get this fight done, to be able to get him all out of the way, and just before like any of the elite troopers kind of like came and ruined my day. So feel free to be able to use things like Electro Chainer and Miasma Blast, and these are going to be your main go-tos for this fight because they destroy the collectors if they get too close, or they just start there to be able to whittling Quendyl down at 1000 damage every single time. Once Quendyl is defeated though, congratulations, you have now beaten Miasma Chronicles, so feel free to enjoy the end cutscenes, and just feel free to be able to bask in everything that you've just done. Unfortunately though, that does mean that it is the end of the game, and that's pretty much it. As soon as you have completed this fight, it just wraps itself up. There's no continue, there's no way to be able to continue like any of the previous side quests or anything like that. It just pretty much ends, and that means that you then have to be able to either boot up a previous save, or to be able to go back into a brand new game and try it on a different difficulty. But there you go, that is everything that I've got to be able to discuss when it comes to this end fight, when it comes to Quendyl. So let me know in the comment section down below, how did you find this fight? Did you do anything a little bit different? Are there any other tips that you wish you could add to this list? Because if there are, then I will make sure to be able to put like a pinned comment so that we all have sort of new ways to be able to help newer players to be able to finish off this fight, because it is challenging, it is pretty nasty, but if you do go about it the right way, then you can actually get this done. Massive thank you for making your way to the end of the video. Massive thank you to the Babylonian family, as always, for their continued support. It really does help the channel out. And if you did learn something useful with yourselves, make sure to drop that like and subscribe for some more Miasma Chronicles gameplay to come your way. But with all that said and done, that just leaves me to say, keep yourself safe, keep yourselves well, and I'll see you all on our next video.